is what we're going to chat about today. But before I get into my questions, let's just find out a little bit about like what you do now. So we'll start with Nina. What's your role now, and what sab role did you do?
Do you want me to explain a bit about actually what I do as well? That'd be helpful.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Nina. I was a sports officer at Kent Union for 2 years. Was also involved with Bucks as national officer and at NUS, Rose, when you were there on the NEC. So all in the political stuff. My current role now, I'm trying to think how best to explain it. I am the community sport and outreach officer for the Olympic Legacy. So that is basically looking at how we create a new piece of city in London, which includes everything from new buildings to new communities and new infrastructure, but mainly looking at how you use, well, my role within that is looking strategically with the Mayor of London at how you use sport as an outreach tool to connect different people in societies, and mainly for social change reasons. So it's within East London, the Olympic Park. There are lots of prevalent not issues isn't the word. There are lots of prevalent communities such as a high knife crime rate, high diabetes rates, low activity within some of the communities, and looking at ways how we stitch these communities together through sport. Some of my role newly involves the huge active travel agenda and looking at how we use human-powered travel as a way of, I guess, making the world a bit more sustainable and getting people more active, and then looking at how we use the major events programme that takes place across London to ensure that people that otherwise wouldn't get the opportunity to participate do. So it's a bit varied and it's amazing. It's a lot of policy work, a lot of working with people. We've got a really interesting board that has Tanni Gray-Thompson on, and Jeff Thompson, who is their ex-athlete. And yeah, there's just a really big agenda around sport policy change and creating a new community, but you should definitely come down for a visit if anyone wants to, and I can show you around.
Thank you. So you've kind of got some of that like policy stuff that you might have like learnt about when you're a sab in your role.
Yeah. So for an example, what I've been doing today I have been looking at how we reopen some of our venues. So a bit like the stuff you probably experience as officers, our venues are operated by private companies and we look after the policy and the implementation plan. So looking at how we open them safely. We've been looking at how there's sadly a massive LGBT and BME homeless youth community in Newham and Hackney, and we're looking at how we use some sport programs to engage those people in the park, and often our route is to try and get them back into education, but as sport as a way to start having those conversations. So I've been on a couple of strategy meetings with the local boroughs about that today, and then actually had a fun team meeting where we went through the worst quizzes we did on lockdown, and my one was a Gemma Collins one which I wrote, so I can also share that as well.
Wow. I didn't know there was that much to know about Gemma Collins, but clearly.
Follow the Instagram, raise you behind.
Oh, yeah, I'm really not very cool nowadays. I mean, probably never was. Anyway, thank you. So let's go next to Annabelle. So what was your sab role and what do you do now?
So I was Vice President of Student Activities at Hertfordshire, and I did that role for 2 years. And then I moved straight into another student union, and I now work at the Union of Kingston Students, and I worked there for 2 years as the sports development coordinator, and that is all your Bucks teams, sports clubs, developing them, looking after them. And then a year ago I moved up to student opportunities manager, so I'm now part of the senior management team at Kingston. And we look after activities, so sports, societies, volunteering and sustainability. So essentially what I was doing as a SAB just now, the staff role for it, which I wouldn't have thought I was doing 5 years ago. Crazy.
And you're working with officers from the other side of the table.
Yeah, which is enlightening. It's very difficult, or not difficult, but very different being on the flip side of the table from being SAB. I found it easier going from SAB to staff member as a coordinator than potentially going from SAB to manager level. There's a bit more overlap, I think, in the SAB and the manager in terms of the work that you're doing. It's a bit more strategic, whereas a coordinator felt more about the doing and kind of getting projects delivered. So taking that kind of work ethic over was, I think that was the only crossover I had as a coordinator. But yeah, I think student unions are like a bubble. You kind of sit in your own little bubble, but I've enjoyed it. It's been great.
Thank you. Right, we'll go next to Imogen. What's your role now? When I asked you the email, you were like, I don't know.
Yeah, it was quite a long reply. So I was the sports officer for Swansea in 2012, 2013. I then did 5 years in PR for British sailing, the Olympic team, and also world sailing. So putting together press releases, photos and all of that in the games for 2016. And then at the end of 2016, I became a farmer. So I work with my dad on our family farm. It's about 1,000 acres in Oxfordshire, and we grow wheat for Warburtons, potatoes for all the major supermarkets, asparagus for Waitrose and Lidl and other major supermarkets. We have a farm shop, a cafe, a pick your own, holiday let, and my main role over the last 3 months has probably been setting up an online shop, a delivery service for all the residents around Oxfordshire. Obviously couldn't get into supermarkets, and dealing with lots of very old people that live by us that were struggling to get out. So we sort of, you know how it was with lots of these farm shops, we just immediately implemented a whole load of new stuff. And my dad was like, what are you doing? I was like, spending a lot of time designing a website. So I'm a farmer, I'm a grower, I'm a retailer, marketer. I do a bit of everything. Spent a lot of my first year writing policy for the farm, health and safety. I mean, we touch wood, a safe farm, and we try and do everything very slow, but there's a lot of damage that can be done with big heavy machinery. And I think that the old guard were maybe a little bit laissez-faire, so I was sort of that was one of the main things that I learned as a student officer, to then implement it, and then you have to make sure it actually happens and to meet with supermarket guidelines and all that kind of stuff. But today I'm reopening our cafe for Saturday, so I was writing menus, contacting suppliers, and working with our new cafe manager, who was our online manager, so that's quite good that we've kept her in. And basically, seeing how we're going to work for Saturday when we open our cafe. And then next week we'll be harvesting potatoes and harvesting wheat, and I'll be in a tractor, so it's quite a random role.
I love looking at Imogen's Instagram, and I encourage you to follow her because it's so funny. Like knowing Imogen from when she was a sports officer, and like going out on Wednesday nights, and now she's like, look, this is how you grow potatoes.
Try to be informative and fun, which you would enjoy, Rosie. My friends in London, they're all just like, what are you doing? I'm like, just here with my strawberries at 8 o'clock at night, just checking they're okay.
Probably not the expected plan from being a sports sab, but
no, not really.
Very fun. And then finally, Ben, what's your role and what SAB position did you have?
Hi everyone. So I was the sports officer at the University of Bath for 2014-2015. So Nina and I were sports officers the same year, and also student officers for universities and colleges sport together. So I now work for Sport England, the arm's length body of DCMS, which kind of distributes funding to grassroots and community sport and physical activity. I'm in the external affairs team there, which essentially means my role is external engagement for the organisation. So Sporting has a lot of different partners who we work with on an operational level, I suppose, delivering XYZ programs that we kind of fund or part fund. So they have some relationship management there. My role and the team that I work within engages central government quite closely. So we work very closely with DCMS as our sponsor department, with a range of other government departments we work with quite extensively. And then we focus a lot of our engagement within my team on Parliament and thinking about how we engage MPs and peers in the House of Lords around what we as an organisation are doing, Sport England, and similarly what the sector is doing. So a lot of it is shouting about championing work which I find pretty cool because it's very similar, I suppose, to a lot of the work which I did when I was a sports officer, shouting about things that I care about and that is driving quite a lot of impact. So that's fab. I did a couple of roles in between as well. So after being a student officer for Bucks, I worked for Bucks. I transitioned into a staff role there and was in kind of a sport development role, sorts, working with student officers and sabbatical officers to amplify student voice, I suppose, and make sure that Bucks was listening to it a bit more effectively. And did various other bits around inclusion, which was my bag when I was there. I then moved into working for an organisation called the Sport and Recreation Alliance, which is the trade association for the sport and physical activity sector. So in essence, was trying to lobby government and Sport England. And then last year moved over to Sport England. So I've kind of moved around a little bit, but yeah, it's been excellent.
I could tell you about my job in between, but we can do that another time.
Do that now. That was going to be my next question.
Sorry.
Quite interesting. I feel like if you're generally from a sport background, I went to work for I travelled for a bit, as everyone does, and then I went to work for a startup called Good Gym. They're amazing. If you like running or like communities or like just talking rubbish to people, go and check them out. But essentially what they do is connect people through running to other people in their neighbourhoods, often older people, people of the age of 60. So you would either run to someone's house and do a task for them, like changing a light bulb or moving around a bed so they can be discharged from hospital, or you would go and do a community mission for your local area. So we've done incredible things like returf the South Bank Centre. We kept Hackney Food Bank running through ridiculous snowy winters, dug out parts of the River Severn. It's just anything that has an impact on the community that you essentially use people hours rather than paid workers. And I worked there for 2 years. It must have been 2 years on their growth strategy. So I was involved in how you took the older people work from being a local idea to a national idea, which was incredible. I'd recommend going to work for a startup at some point in your career. There were 7 of us sat around a little table every day in Somerset House, and it was, very, very fun.
Thanks for sharing that. So the next thing I wanted to ask, but I will encourage everybody watching to also send some questions in because they don't all need to be from me. The next thing I wanted to know was about like the transferable skills, because obviously you've all kind of mentioned a couple as you've been introducing yourselves, but what stuff we can you like think back now and go, oh, I first started knowing how to do this, or first had an experience of this when I was a SAB. What sort of things are there like that, so that any officers watching can be like, that's the sort of stuff I need to be watching out for? I don't mind who goes first.
I've got a couple which I can throw in if that's useful. There are a couple of things. I mentioned that a lot of my job now is like shouting about stuff which the sports sector is doing to help people get active, similar to in many ways what I was doing at Bath. But the big one, I suppose, which has been transferable is like talking a lot about things that you care about and talking about them in a very passionate way, but in a compelling way as well, which is ultimately going to bring people round to your way of thinking. So whether that's explicitly asking them for something or whether that's winning hearts and minds, I found that really, really useful. And I was quite an introvert when I started university and kind of went through a social transformation type thing I played lacrosse at uni, and it was quite sociable, and I came out of my bubble a bit, but I'd been very introverted and hadn't been particularly confident speaking to people. My role as a SAB like gave me the opportunity to do that in a kind of even bigger way than I'd been used to date, and I now do it as a job on a daily basis. So like speaking passionately about things, I think when you're going through your SAB year this year, drawing on the experiences of the people around you, drawing on the experiences of your network beyond your specific union as well, to understand, one, how people are being effective in driving change, is really, really useful. And two, just, I suppose, if you want to go down the route of driving social change in some sense in another role afterwards, thinking about when you're in the moment, what is it that's making you tick? and being quite self-aware, or as self-aware as you can be, and then reflecting post-event, I found really, really useful. Yeah, so that's one for me. And then the other, I used to be awfully organised. I'm much better now. And whatever your system is, or could be, like, find that and test it out, see what works for you, and it can change and all the rest of it. I journal quite a lot now to just help me process things, but used, I think, what used to be Wunderlist, and now it's Microsoft To Do, but just basically an online to-do list, which I can have on my phone or on a desktop or something like that. But it's a good brain dump. They're my two systems which I use kind of in tandem with one another. But organisation is a big one, because in any role you're going to have to be juggling all sorts. I think it's more true than any other role. In a sab role, you're juggling so much at times. But it's definitely a skill which serves you well afterwards.
Good tips. Just picking up on the whole, like, knowing yourself and knowing, like, what you care about and talking about that. Did you get any, like, training or advice when you were starting as a sab that helped you?
I'm trying to think back. We did a little bit with Scott Temple Farmer.
Yeah.
Is he in US? I can't remember.
Good
sorry?
name drop. Good name drop.
Yeah.
This is classic.
No. I think I was trying. Sorry, I was looking through. So we had a few sessions as a sab team around trying to work out how we were going to basically tag team some issues, and trying to reflect at the start of the year as to what each of us was bringing to the table in terms of what skills we already had in the bag, and actually what ones we might need to develop. But that was really useful. But I think the thing which I found really excellent, and probably haven't had since to the same level, or definitely haven't had since, is the depth with which you work and integrate with a small team. And I think students' unions are really, really powerful for that. I work in an organisation now which has 300 staff, and although I worked for small organisations before that, it never had the same level of feel as a students' union did, in terms of tightness and kind of like conviviality, everyone being in it together. So I think drawing on that and understanding what you can bring to the table, and what others might be able to, and what you can complement each other, was really important. I don't think that's answered your question at all, but yeah.
We'll take that. Does anyone else have any, like, of those transferable skills, stuff you've learned that?
Yeah, I would say that when you have to go and speak to the university, so you've got an issue, you've got an idea, you want to implement something new, it's very much the same as going to speak to a big supermarket, because you're walking into a room of 50-year-old white male men who have all been in the industry and have all the experience and think they know better. But at the end of the day, you're a sab, so you're closer to being a student, which is their customer, or I'm a 30-year-old, so I'm closer to being the person and female, which makes 85% of purchases from supermarkets anyway. So I'm more likely to know what the customer wants than possibly the people sitting in the room. So I guess as a sab and an officer, you have to sort of build up the courage to go, this is what we want, this is how we do it, and have that conversation with those people who may have loads of experience but aren't really interested in anything new. And obviously sport is always changing, and activities, and the same with food. So that's what I've really learned, to have the courage to go in there and be like, no, we're going to do this. I mean, also with my own father, who is, white and male, and I'm like, no, this is how we're going to do it now. But mostly with those big companies, because at the end of the day, they may be the big company, but you have the produce. You either have the students or the potatoes, for example, and they can't actually do anything.
You just compare students to potatoes.
They're the same. At the end of the day, you have nothing, and and if you want to make a difference, you can either get your students to help you get your point across, or not at all. And I guess the other thing is, I employ a lot of students. So our farm shop is very busy over the summer, and students love free stuff. And one of the perks working for us is you get as much free pick your own produce as you can pick. So as much free pick your own strawberries and raspberries. And that creates a team. I know we all joke about, drinks and partying and that kind of thing, but our team, especially this year, has made the job what it is. Obviously there's been no social at all outside of work, so all the team are really close to each other, and they do all go strawberry picking at the end of the day, or raspberry picking in their group. And I think that if you take that back to sort of SABs and also sports team, that value of being in a small team where you know people, and if you give something small to them, they'll give a lot back, as long as you sort of nurture that relationship. And I think that that starts from the very beginning of being a sports officer. You have to go in sort of positive and happy and be like, I'm going to do this, this and this for you, and then follow through and do it, and then they will repay that favour in whatever they can. And that might be when you ask them to stand up and support you in front of the university, they'll do that. But yeah, free stuff works the dream. Everyone loves free stuff.
There's definitely something in that, isn't there, that whole idea. And I've learned a lot in the, like, what we call now in a corporate sense, like, does soft relationship building, and like actually to get the results that Ben referenced around like big political change and the stuff you do, like how you start, and this not in a patronise way, but how you start to build those relationships outside of meetings, and how you just pick up a call or go for a coffee when you just got to get a few mates on side, haven't you? Get a few allies in any political situation, and it massively helps. I remember, quite the opposite to Ben, I've always been a massive extrovert, if you haven't already been able to tell, and always been just, very loud, very high energy. And I remember I was really worried about going into what seemed like quite a formal role, and I did a lot of work with our CEO, and we were very lucky, we had great mentors at Kent around like authenticity and empathy, because I think it's really hard to sometimes depersonalize and dehumanize like a lot of the issues we talk about and a lot of the things that we're going through. And I found that particularly difficult, because I would always take on a lot of like the emotional stress of some of the things or mistakes that are happening. And actually, like, I don't think that's a bad thing at all, but it's just about learning how you do. And still now in my current role, thinking that the fight of homelessness is something I can solve single-handedly, and it's not at all. But so that's my cat down there. Can you hear her? She obviously wants to get in on the drama always. But like, there's definitely something around staying true to like your authentic self, but finding ways and tools to help enable you to do that, and enable you to cope in a working environment. Like Ben mentioned his journaling, and before on this Imogen mentioned about like finding a lifestyle job if that suits you. But I think having those values in place. As I was leaving our sub role, we had a half to each of our mentors, and it was probably the most valuable thing we'd done. She'd gone through with me, and we wrote on a piece of paper 2 lists, and she said, what are things in your life that are non-negotiable in your life, and then what are things that are non-negotiable in your job, and then do what is negotiable, what are the things you want out of them. And every time I apply for a new job or apply for a situation, I get my list back out. It's just a square piece of paper that I've now laminated, and actually those non-negotiables have still not changed, and I don't think they ever will. And I think drawing them out from yourselves, and in the decisions you make and in the way you make decisions. I remember in a recent meeting I had to be quite really direct and really quite rude to a group, again of course they were white men, about not expecting a decision. And I came out of the meeting and I was really upset with myself for being really brash, but it pushed me to my last point of, I guess, our relationship. And I just thought, if I'd have done a little bit more around the soft building of relationships, or looked around how I could have approached the situation a bit better, that would have been probably a better outcome for all of us. But I think trying to get tools in place where that if you're going to have to not be you and it's going to upset the way you're doing work, think about ways to develop those would be my advice. But that's probably more from like an emotional perspective rather than a practical one.
Can I just come in on that? As well, Rosie, just very, very briefly. I think I absolutely get what you're saying, about it. Like when you're in a situation and you wanting to say something a certain way, and something may tip you over the edge in for whatever reason. I think one thing which SAB roles are really good for as well is completely shifting you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, definitely.
And putting you in an environment where it's kind of fight or flight type thing, but your fighting is adapting to kind of talk in a certain way more often than not, I would say. So that's
wrong though, that you have to change, and this always go on, carry on, and then I'll
no, I don't think it's wrong at all, but I think it's a really good environment to build those skills, where you're surrounded by people who, like within a union, ultimately are wanting to change something, whatever it might be, that is kind of your priorities as a union or your priorities as an officer. But you have the people around you who are able to help you try and drive that change. The point that I'm trying to make is it's really important to kind of shift yourself out of your comfort zone and understand actually how to make hard decisions, or how to kind of say things which aren't going to be popular sometimes. There are going to be times in a sabbatical role and then throughout life where you're going to have to say things that are going to piss some people off.
And I don't disagree with that at all. Well, you remember the famous John Inverdale argument that I decided to pull on at conference. So I do not shy away from saying things that don't deserve to be said. What I mean is that sometimes I think that people, and this is the thing you'll learn, and particularly universities, and when you're in a stir or pale meeting, they'll push you into situations where you feel like you have to communicate and do things in a way they want you to, and they do that as a way of almost, and not cheating, but it's big corporations, they do it in a way to try and either silence you from a decision or delay something. And I think if you learn to adapt in a way that's authentic to you and learn to say, I remember Kent, often they'd always want papers, and I was like, I fucking hate writing papers, or I don't like doing it, I have to do it. But I said to them, actually, could I come at you with a presentation and bring some students around the table, because that's a way that I would prefer to talk. It was about academic free Wednesdays, which is, I'm sure, something that's still happening across
no problem.
Still, always. And I was like, we've gone through this for the last decade of writing papers, it's clearly not working, let's actually like have a conversation with some students. And of course, like, because we adapted the style and it was something that I was more comfortable with, that began to get different results. And I think, so yeah, I agree, Ben, like, obviously, yeah, do say things that are out of the box and do work in a way that's best for you, but also don't be scared to challenge the way that you work best, because that's when you're going to get the best outcomes and results.
Juicy conversation. Love
Sorry,
it.
I realised I swore, and that was the one thing you told us not to do. It just slipped out.
Swear. Just, yeah.
Not too much.
We're not swearing all the time. We'll get away with it. We're not broadcasting to TV. We're fine. I've just had a question sent to me anonymously. I don't know why it's anonymous, because it's a great question. About, it's not kind of what I had in mind to talk about, but it's a really good point to make. We're in weird times. I'm going to say it. Unprecedented. Everyone's saying that at the moment. It's weird. We're in a pandemic. Sport is one of the things that already has been thrown up in the air. What would you be thinking about if you were still sports officers and activities officers now, and you just started in a global pandemic, with the likelihood being that student sport can't be anything like it was going forward? Where would your thoughts be? And the thing that I'm really interested in, because I know we don't have the power in our positions, or if you were still a sports officer, to just be like, well, sport's going to happen because we're in a global pandemic. The bit that I'm most interested in sort of tackling and thinking about is that community bit, and like keeping the community of sport and like keeping sports teams like feeling like they're part of something going forward. So what sort of stuff would you be thinking about if you go back to being a sports sab? What sort of stuff would you be thinking about going into summer and like the freshers period and starting off that academic year? I'll go to Annabelle first, because she's probably been thinking about any of the others, seeing she works in an SU.
Yeah, so you are living the dream. So I guess the first instance that we're thinking about is initially, what can we actually do, and how much can we actually bring back normality? So students are now living in a very virtual world, and that triggers all sorts of loneliness and mental health issues. So we're looking at what we can do to actually bring the students together in a physical way, so they're not hiding away and they're not doing things behind a screen, because Zoom's great and it's proven itself to be great, but it's still Zoom, it's still on the computer. So we're looking in initial stages of what we can actually do. So we can go out to ride our bikes, we can go running, we can do water sports, we can play tennis, and there are some things that your institutions will be able to facilitate, and we are putting pressure and we are looking and planning with the university to facilitate as much sport as we can within the guidelines, and knowing that hopefully the guidelines will change and develop, that we can then adapt with it. We think, well, the attitude is that we can plan as normal, and then I guess recover it and bring it back in if we need to. So it's easier to expand. It'd be easier to expand for us and then work backwards if we need to. So we're looking at developing and putting into place everything that we can do. And then if we need to, then we can start thinking about, right, tennis is out the window, no one can go running anymore. How do we bring those communities back? So by nature, some of the personalities and the students that we have that play sport, and you'll know it because you've probably played sports as officers, very communal groups, and those communities will still exist even with or without playing the sport. And then it goes back to how you facilitate that, and that will be probably back on the Zoom sites, back on trying to recruit students to have and build those communities and those hubs. So whether or not they be social distant hubs, but at least they're still there and they are budding for when we can then go, right, sport is back on, knowing that in theory that the sports season will start in January. So we're looking to try and put the foundations in as if sports teams and sports clubs exist. And then if we can do sport in September, we will. And if we can't, then we'll build those communities and then try and expand them in January. But I think, it's really difficult because obviously we all love sport and we want it to do well. But I think there's a lot of stuff we can do in terms of coronavirus has kind of, I think, highlighted that sport is so important. And it's one of the things a lot of people have turned to for either support or in isolation. And I think that, things like yoga and running, they've kind of come into their own. And I think it would be a shame to miss out on what seems to be some momentum behind sport. So people who wouldn't necessarily done it before are now doing it. And I think students will be coming to university maybe having picked up a yoga mat for the first time, or they've joined Strava for the first time. There's kind of a hype around it. So I think as an officer, it would be a shame to miss out on what seems to be a organic interest in sport. So I would be jumping on that and proving that there is like an appetite for it, and what can the university do to heighten that and do it as much as they can. And I think all institutions should be trying to deliver sport in some capacity, because people are doing it now. There just may not be as we know it. So it may not be team sports. It could just be, right, tennis courts open, let's put people in and everyone can play sport, and you kind of build the clubs back up again from a later point in the year.
Thank you. I knew you'd have thought about it. Does anyone else have anything to say on that, like building sport back up again?
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things. One, at Sport England we're getting a lot of data through looking at what activity levels are or how they've changed across lockdown and how social distancing restrictions are affecting that. And one of the things that we're looking at, which applies similarly, I would expect, to a lot of students' unions, is looking at physical activity and actually how there's an opportunity at the moment. It's difficult for traditional sport to operate in the environment that we are in, but there's huge opportunity around empowering people to get active in their own spaces. And a lot of the data is showing us that actually, especially with children, girls are saying that they're more active than boys, because boys stereotypically engage with team sports more, and girls don't so much, especially when they're younger, perhaps, and they're feeling more empowered to do what they want, do whatever physical activity they want in their own time, in their own space. There's less fear of judgment being in an environment where other people are around, etc. So I think there's an opportunity to think about how universities and unions might be able to engage the unengaged, essentially, and think about how it's an opportunity to build those bridges which might not have been there before. There's loads of tech out there at the moment, and kind of increased digitization of physical activity particularly, and looking longer term as well, dependent on what the lay of the land looks like. I know Bucks they've got like a student advisory group together, haven't they, around looking at what the return of sport looks like. And we're very dependent, obviously, at the moment around government and whether indoor facilities can open mid-July and all the rest of it. But thinking about longer term, if there's not going to be the operational opportunities there, like in the immediate term, thinking about building relationships, working with the university to try and lobby the university essentially for any further investment in X, Y, Z. So one of the things I really struggled with as an officer was that I I only
Sorry.
I only came to terms with this after being an officer. I was an awful officer in many ways, in the sense I was thinking in the here and now and thinking about what is really good and is going to shine a really good light on me. Had gone from being a very introvert and became a bit more egotistical almost. And the really important thing I think as a SAB, which is finding the balance, but thinking about the long term and what's going to have a long term impact as well, and thinking like Nina's now like legacy stuff. It's really, really important. So thinking about what you can do over this year if you're not able to do stuff which is activity in the here and now, what can you put in place which will make things easier kind of post-COVID, or in the new COVID world. So whether that be like infrastructure and lobbying university for infrastructure investment, whether it be kind of partnerships with the local community, whatever. Reframing it, I suppose.
That's a really interesting point. So like now on that flip side, as a staff member, you're working on a different timeline to staff officers, and you officers are going to be working on a different timeline to the staff team as well, and your timings aren't going to be the same. So you're right, finding that balance between what you want to achieve in your year and trying to cram as much as you can as possible, but then also thinking, just because it doesn't happen in your lifetime as a SAB, it will still be there, and you put the building bricks in, the foundations in to produce maybe what you wanted to do 2 years later, because the life cycles are very different and you're going to be working with different timescales. So although you may not see results immediately, it doesn't mean that they're there. But then also that swings roundabouts in terms of, you're there to make an impact, and if there are problems that arise, you have to act quickly and be able to react quickly. So it's a balance between trying to achieve then, now, here, and then to understand that you're on different timescales. And I think sometimes that's a really tricky thing to master. And if you can do it, then I think you'll be well away.
That was some of the downtime, but the change in our work schedules has meant that, and within this role as well that I'm currently doing, has meant that we've been able to look at slightly different things. So actually I'm watching this when I was an officer at Kent and with NUS and Bucks, but there was stuff around trans inclusion within sport and trying to look at policy changes around that. So we're doing a massive audit of all of the venues across East London and all the ones in the Olympic Park to make sure that they're trans inclusive, to make sure that they all currently do meet the equality standards, but actually like what's the other work that you can continue to do alongside that. But also like I was thinking about what you were saying around the community aspect, Rosie, and we've noticed that a lot of my work over the last few months has been looking at how you change someone's primary existence. So a lot of the groups we fund and work with are sports deliverers, but actually like when it comes down to it, they've changed it. An example is we work with an organisation called Bike Works, and often their role is all ability cycling, and they look at how to get people with disabilities out cycling and how do you make the cycle infrastructure across London safe for people with disabilities. Since lockdown, a lot of the people they often were having out in their sessions have been the ones that have had to shield or isolate. So instead they've changed and we've helped them develop their business model to almost run a cycle freight organisation. And so over the last 3 months they've delivered 16,000 medical items and food items across East London, using instructors that were often taking out the people with disabilities. So it's about looking at how do you like look for new opportunities and keeping people active and keeping people connected, and sport within that is still the lever and the connector, but they're not playing sport or delivering sport together, but they're still using their enthusiasm to do something that's got massive benefit.
A really good example. There was an example a few years ago of I think it was from Royal Holloway, and when there was all the flooding in Egham where Royal Holloway Uni is, whenever a fixture got cancelled because of the flooding, because they couldn't play, the union encouraged all the sports teams to go and do some volunteering to help with the flooding. So they went and like moved sandbags and stuff, which is like you're doing something together, you're having a good time. May not be what you intended to do today, but still
good. Because we've been really concerned about some of the young people in Hackney. Like sport is their get out. Sport's the reason they're not often finding themselves in a situation that potentially could involve gang violence or knife crime, and we were really worried about actually that cohort of young, and it is mostly young men that we work with. So instead we gave some alternative funding. There've been honestly single-handedly been running the food bank across Hackney. They've helped thousands and thousands of people. When they would usually be at their Wednesday night basketball club, they've been in there packing food bags, delivering them by hand, and it's been incredible. And the point that Annabelle and Ben made, like, these people want to be part of a community and want to form it. As long as there's some kind of output or reason for them to connect, they'll continue to do that. But it's just about finding what is safe within the parameters and what you can be doing socially distant. But hopefully at each of people's universities or student unions, there'll be stuff happening and stuff to get involved with. But I can imagine it probably is a bit of a worry with incoming students.
It's really
I'm
good.
sure. Okay.
Nice positive for us to think about. We're nearly at time, so I just wanted to ask you, I'd like you to just think about for a second. So think back to you as a starting sports officer. Today is the 1st of July. It's day one of the sabbatical officer year in most universities and colleges. Think back to you then and all those other people that are doing that today, and get, like, what's the one bit of advice that you'd give to sports and activities officers starting off in their roles today? We'll go to Ben first. Sorry. I'm going to go Ben, Imogen, Annabelle, Nina, so you can prepare yourself for...
Right.
I'll finish on a high, shall I?
One bit of advice I would give. Ultimately, like, enjoy it. Like, it's a huge opportunity being a SAB. You're going to get exposed to things that you just won't for a few years after you finish your time as a SAB, potentially. Whether that be like strategic decisions, some of the money and money management there, might be line management, whatever. There's going to be so much that you're exposed to, so drink it in, like really drink it in, and however you want to process that, and like make sure that you remember as much as possible and take as much away from it. Find that system. And the other thing, I'm a trustee of a small, of a youth charity, and my first experience as a trustee was when I was a sabbatical officer. Young trustees are hugely in demand. So both when you're like going through your sabbatical year, and similarly following your sabbatical year, and increasingly there are organisations looking for trustees under 25. So you'll be one of a very small number of people of your age who have experience as a trustee at your age. So be looking for opportunities if you want to be doing more, both during your sub year and beyond. There's a really good organisation who you should check out called the Young Trustees Movement, who some of you may or may not be aware of. But they do loads to kind of advertise vacancies for young trustees, and similarly think about how you can develop to make sure that you're kind of in the best possible position to be a good young trustee. So they're potentially one to look at as well for CPD. But yeah, think big.
Thank you. Imogen, what advice would you give to past you or other people in your position a few years ago?
Ask me. Don't drink so much on a Wednesday. Will probably be my first bit of advice. Do all your work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and have Thursday mornings off. I did do that. I did work very hard Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then came in later on Thursdays and Fridays. That is actually a very good tip.
Imogen also had a high-vis jacket that she wore on Wednesday nights, being like, don't talk to me about sports officer stuff.
Yeah, I did, and it actually was a game changer, and that is a point. Never agree to anything when you are out on a night out. Actually, that is going to be my point of advice. Never just go, absolutely, email me or text me or call me tomorrow. If you are on a night out with friends and you see someone that you may have dealt with earlier in that day with a difficult situation, because you're obviously going to be out with students, just go, let's go to another bar or another part of the nightclub, because you will agree to stuff or you will do stuff, because we all are, sometimes can be a bit stupid when we've had a few drinks. So that is actually a very important piece of advice. I would say probably all of us have done something that we slightly regret. And I would say the other thing is, you know more than you think you know. You've been voted in for a reason. You've been at university for 3 years. You've experienced everything that your students are experiencing. So when you have to do something, you've got your other SAB team to rely on, but maybe they don't know that as much about activities as you do or about sport as you do. So take their advice, but go with your gut with your decision making. And like Annabelle said, some things you can implement and you may not see the benefit for a couple of years, and don't take that to heart, because it's really, really important. I did some things that I think didn't really make changes for a couple of years, and now I think they're sort of ingrained in the Swansea way, I like to think. So
we'll have to ask Georgia.
Yeah, they're still doing what we were doing back then.
Annabelle, top tip?
I think it would be like the opportunities. Like it's like Ben said, you're exposed to so much, and the learning curve is just that. And if you can push yourself to be uncomfortable in the way that you will develop, you learn nothing by sort of sticking with what you know, and being able to push yourself to do things that maybe you find a little bit uncomfortable. If you don't like having to do it unless you actually do it. So I'd say yes to everything. Any opportunity, take it, and then you can always change your mind once you've experienced it first, but don't say no before you've tried it. And I guess finally, time management. So you've got a year and you want to try and squeeze everything in, and you probably love what you do, but you're on a contract for a reason. Don't burn out and don't try and do everything. So I ended up working late nights, and you want to do your best, but I would always try and recommend that you're in your job, and sometimes you can take those habits with you. So try and make sure that you're keeping your time frames in your work, because you need that life balance. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to help anyone if you find yourself in a position you can't help yourself. So say yes to all the opportunities, but make sure you have time for yourself too.
Thank you. And finally, one last point from Nina.
I've got two, but I'll do them very quickly.
All right, you have two.
The first one's probably more serious and the second one not so, but I would say that the actions you make, whether that's you as a person or you writing papers, are very political, and don't be afraid to do that. I remember getting continually annoyed that people told me that being a sports officer wasn't the political role and you were there just to have fun, and I was like, no, everything we do is inherently political and is about social change to make sure and I think that's really important, and your actions within what you do as a person. I remember we've spoken a lot about being a woman in meetings. I remember being at one meeting actually with Bucks, and again John Indale, my best mate, and he was like, she'll take the notes, and I remember that point being so worried that I was going to have to say yes, and I was like, absolutely not, I'm not doing this, just because I'm the youngest person and I'm a minority because I'm a woman, I'm not being treated like that. And I was so proud of myself in that moment. So I was like, learn within a role, learn to be the kind of leader you want to be, and learn to know that your actions and how you form yourself, they are political actions, and that's a very good thing and a positive action. How many times can I say action in that? And then the next one is make other sub mates, because I think it's so important to have a network around you and staff within your SU. And I was really lucky that I had Ben and Annabelle in the years that I was in, and we had a really good network around us, and we used to talk about things, because they're the only other people in that current time that are going through what you're going through. And you can get advice from other unions and advice from what they're up to, and having good staff mates within your SU, I think, is incredibly important, to be either your ally or your mate or just a sounding board. But just make mates. That'd be my advice mostly with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thanks Ben, thanks Nina, thanks Annabelle, thanks Imogen for sharing some wise words, top tips, some good stories. Very much appreciated, and I've recorded this as well, so hopefully we'll be able to share that with some more people too. Georgia said that's filled her with confidence for life after uni and SAB life. Ace.
Good.
It's strange, isn't it? Because you're in a SAB, and then you're so engrossed in SAB stuff, you kind of there's jobs and stuff now. And
what next?
Really thought.
Raise us or find us on LinkedIn or whatever and stay connected. Happy to just chat more rubbish to everyone.
Yeah, I think I've shared all of your LinkedIn profiles in the blurb for the session. We're going to wrap up now. Thank you all so much for being on this panel and for chatting to us today. I've got a sad announcement to make, unfortunately, that in 5 or 6 minutes time we're going to be starting what should be the Meet the Chairs session, where we're meeting the chairs of all of the organisations involved in the festival, so Student Radio, publications, TV, volunteering and fundraising. We are still going to go ahead with that session, but before we're going to do a 2-minute silence because unfortunately an activities officer from the University of Bath Students' Union, who was supposed to start his role today, died on Monday. And we're going to be doing a 2-minute silence for him at the start of that session. So you're welcome to join. I'm sharing the link now if you want to join that session. We'll be over there in a few minutes' time. Normally what we do after these sessions is open up the coffee shop, which is table 2, so I've linked that too. So if anybody wants to go over to there to like carry on this chat, you're welcome to do that, but we'll be doing a 2-minute silence over in the other meeting in about 5 to 6 minutes time.